first test of the day. Check. How you all doing? You feeling energized? My name is Jose Echeverry. I am the candidate for the Green Party of Ontario for Markham, Stouffville. This is an Earth Day celebration, so I'm not supposed to speak politics, which I find it's incredibly perplexing. I don't think anything is more important than the people that govern us. And I think anybody that wants this job should tell you why they want this job and how they're going to doing things differently. I'm not going to do that because we're here for an Earth Day celebration. All I can tell you is this. If you don't like the reds, if you don't like the blues, if you don't like them oranges, you could go green. And I will be remiss if I don't thank the people that made this happen. I don't have the time to thank everybody individually, but I do have to thank all the volunteers that have made this possible. Thank you. And there is no more important volunteer than our Chief Financial Officer, my wife, Serena Echeverry. So how do you introduce a panel like the one we have without going into the dark places of the destruction of the planet? I suppose it can be done by saying that we don't have any need whatsoever to destroy the planet. We have the technology, we have the money. What are we missing is the political commitment to do the right thing. You will be hearing from a group of speakers that are, in the case of David Suzuki, devoted their lives to try to make sure that this planet can remain whole for present and future generations, not just for humans, but for all the other inhabitants of our planet. And it is my honor to tell you that the people that will speak to you today will have a little bit of time, a bit of time, to talk to you about the questions you may have. Because too many times we speak, and too few times we listen. And we Greens do politics different. That's why we're asking your support in the next election. And before I conclude my remarks today, I need to be totally frank with you. For us to win, we need your support. And this is why the program that you have in your hands has two options. There's a volunteer form, and there is a donation form. The fact is that the cards are stacked against us Greens because the other guys just need to show up and they get 20% of the vote. It doesn't matter if they are good people or bad people. 20% of the vote will go for one or the other. But as David Suzuki told me a long time ago, the middle is the one that needs to be convinced that things can be done differently. And that's what this evening is all about. It's about you listening and us listening to you. And I want to start today's evening with a young woman that is like me, a Southerner. You may have noticed I got a bit of an accent. I'm Canadian by choice. I'm not Canadian by birth. I was born in Chile, where I fought against the... Thank you. There's a few Chileans in the crowd. We fought for democracy very hard. We had to be chased out of democracy. Dictatorship was ruling our nation, and we fought for that. When I was a young person, I actually helped organize the secondary schools of my city, and I kept getting expelled from each school that I was because the schools were governed by the dictatorship. So we take very seriously democracy. And I decided to run for office because I see that there's a deficit. a deficit on ideas, a deficit on ethics, and most importantly, a deficit of local representation. Politicians are being elected, and then they forget who put them in that chair. And that cannot be like that. And it will not be like that with me, and I can assure you it will not be like that with Karen Bergman. So Karen Bergman is a person that is also a Canadian by choice. She was born in South Africa, where she had to fight the power there too, because those guys had a very different problem, but similar situation. A small minority opposing and punishing a big majority. So Karen will tell you what it means to be a millennial woman on the 21st century and what it's all about when you're trying to do the right thing for your community. So why don't we give her a round of applause?
Thanks, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you so much, Jose, for that amazing introduction. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Happy Earth Day. And thank you again to the amazing volunteers that worked so hard to make this all happen. You guys are awesome. Let's give them another round of applause. And yeah, thank you guys for coming. It means a lot that you all came out. So my name, like Jose mentioned, is Karen Bergman, and I'm here to share a little bit about who I am and my journey to make a difference in the world, being a young person and being a woman. Like Jose mentioned, I was born in South Africa during the apartheid, and my family moved to Markham when I was 3. So it was more my parents doing the fighting and the struggling, but we moved here when I was 3, and I'm thankful every day that they chose Canada to call their home. We live in a beautiful country where we are free to do whatever we want, to say whatever we want, and to be who we are. And we have an infinite number of possibilities and opportunities to make change and build the lives for ourselves that we want. But it's not always easy, especially as a young person and especially as a woman. When generally the voice of a young person is deemed unimportant, trivial, without merit, and as a woman in a world run by men who are not really used to listening to a woman's ideas or taking direction from a strong, passionate female. When you, thank you. Apparently I'm not the only one that thinks like that. When you were younger, how many of you felt pretty helpless? Did you feel like there was nothing you could do to change anything because you were too young? I certainly did. After all, our first experiences in school is usually sit down, shut up, and listen. Stop fidgeting, don't talk to your neighbors, pay attention. I grew up thinking I was pretty insignificant, that my opinion didn't matter, and I was powerless to change anything. I felt I had to fall in line, fit the mold, get a good job, go to university, buy a house, and work the 9-to-5 life until I retire. So I did that. I went to university, I studied accounting, I chose a straightforward career path where I knew I could make a lot of money and just keep to myself. But after graduating, I started to know myself a bit better, develop my self-confidence, and I realized I wanted to do more in this world. I saw so many problems, and I wanted to help fix things. I wanted to protect this beautiful planet that we live on, fight injustice, teach children to be respectful of everyone they meet, and inspire people of all ages to stand up for what they believe in so that they can help solve the problems that they saw. But I didn't really know how, and I didn't believe in myself. How often do you see a young person leading a movement on TV? Or better yet, a young girl? It's finally starting to break through with the students that started the March of Our Lives in the States and Malala Yousafzai, but still it feels like a novelty, and often it doesn't get the attention or respect it deserves. How much different would our world be if our children, especially our girls, were taught that their opinions and ideas were important, that if they were nurtured to believe in what they felt was right and in their own voice and their power. If they were actively listened to and validated and respected by the adults that they look up to, like their parents, their teachers, and their older siblings. Our imagination and compassion is the strongest when we're younger. The weight of the world hasn't yet dawned on us, and we have so much hope. Furthermore, children know the difference between right and wrong. You tell a child about a company stealing our water, about clear-cutting our land or our forests, polluting our land, and see what they say. Heck, tell a kid that everyone in the class is getting ice cream, except for one kid, and see their reaction. They know what's fair and what's not. But then we grow up, and we lose that passion for justice. We become caught up in making money to survive, putting food on the table, and we don't seem to care about companies that steal our water for profit, the fact that we're wiping out species of animals left, right, and center, destroying their habitats and their food sources, or even the billions of tons of plastics that's destroying our oceans and slowly making its way into our bodies. I don't blame you. We feel helpless. We feel that there's nothing we can do and we don't have the time or the energy to fight. But our children do. They have the will, the compassion, and the energy. Imagine what would happen if we gave our youth the tools and the power to fight for what they believed in. I'm telling you right now, the world would be a better place. Strong children grow up to be strong adults. Children that believe in themselves grow up to be adults who have the confidence to fight for what's right and don't back down when things get difficult. We need to start listening to our kids, supporting them with their initiatives, and not letting our own filters and biases be lethargic or cause us to be lethargic and pessimistic towards their dreams, especially girls. As a girl, it's even harder. There's a systemic and socially perpetuated stigma where an outspoken female is perceived as combative or abrasive, hormonal or emotional, and a passionate woman is automatically discounted and not heard or appreciated or even respected. Not only does this prejudice affect the people that she's trying to communicate to, but it also affects her. It creates a self-doubt, lowers her self-esteem, and where she believes that she's not worthy of being listened to. That's how I felt growing up, and I still deal with that feeling to this day. You might not realize it, but we subconsciously cut down strong females, especially if they're under 30. Why? Do our opinions matter any less? Do we not care or feel or love as much as older males? Are we not as intelligent or creative or capable? We need to work at actively giving young women a chance to be heard to make change. If we don't, our girls will not believe in themselves, our world will not change as best as it can, and our daughters and our sisters will not achieve their full potential, won't feel fulfilled in their lives, will grow up being unhappy and suffer from mental health issues. When we see a strong woman, girl, or young person, we must support them. We must give them the same respect we would a man. We must not discount them before they even begin to speak. If we do this, we open up the doors for passion to flourish. And by actively supporting them, we can change our world for the better. I'll leave you with this quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., someone who suffered from systemic biases, who fought for his community to be respected and have equal rights, and who 50 years ago was assassinated for speaking out. It reads, "I may be poor, but I am somebody. I may be young, but I am somebody. I may be small, but I am somebody. I may make a mistake, but I am somebody. I am black, brown, white. I speak a different language, but I must be respected, protected, never rejected. I am somebody." Thank you.
Well, that's how it is. And I think you need to reflect on that for a second, what it actually means on the next election, to have people that not only think a little broader, more different, more inclusive. How do you make it happen that people like Karen or myself or our next speaker, Mike Schreiner, will actually win in the election that is coming on June 7th? Depends on you. If this room of people and the people that are in the room outside, there's 2 full rooms outside, plus we're broadcasting live to YouTube, Facebook, etc. If you help us, we will win. All it takes is this amount of people to come in a coordinated manner to knock on doors. We knock on doors in the high density areas of Markham, Stouffville, and you will see this green in Queen's Park. I go to Queen's Park, I have your back. It's as simple as that. I go to Queen's Park, I harness the Ontario government to create local development in Stouffville and in Markham. And if you live here in Stouffville, you know that we are being neglected. Our storefronts are closing, rent is extremely expensive, small, medium enterprise, which is the backbone of our nation, cannot thrive because the people that represent us at the moment care more about their party, the votes, and that kind of thing. I'm going to introduce the next speaker, which is a business person, a small business person that is a leader of the Green Party. Mike Schreiner, I will tell a brief anecdote. When we met a year and a half ago, I said, we need to have coffee, Mike. And he goes, of course, Jose, love to have coffee. So we're sitting down in the awkward moment of when you want to say something to somebody, don't know how to say it. And he goes, I got to tell you something. And I say, me too. And he goes, well, you go first. And I say, Mike, my family and I want to ask you that we want to run for the Green Party. He goes, great. I wanted to ask you to run for the Green Party. And then he says something that tells you about the character of Mike. I say, Mike, what you need to understand is I'm a very loyal person. And I will do this, but I'm not angling for your job. And he looked at me square in the eye and say, Jose, as a leader, my job is to raise the next leader. And I got really spooked when he said that. Because then he named me Shadow Cabinet Minister of Climate Change and Environment. And I'm, holy moly, what does that mean? And he goes, that means you gotta fight the good fight for us. And I say, well, that's good, because I know the Minister of Climate Change and Environment, and I can wait to be in a debate with him, because I know what buttons to push, and he goes like this. So I was waiting for that moment, and then the guy quit. Yeah, actually quit. And, took a job in some NGO in Alberta. Who the heck does that? He was like the most powerful climate change and environment minister in Canada, and he took a job in another province before his term was up. And I'm like, now, who do I fight with? The new guy, it's not as much fun. Well, perhaps for Eva, but this is the same thing that is happening with Mike. Even though he has not yet won his seat, I think he's got a really good chance in wealth. Yeah. Yes, he does. And this is not hippy-dippy wishful thinking. Why I know that is because I went canvassing door to door in wealth with him. And he said, Jose, we go to the most red area of wealth where people are like true blood red. And I'm like, okay. So I'm knocking on the doors. We're here for the job interview. Excuse me? What job interview? Don't you know there's an election in June 7th? And Mike Schreiner lives in wealth and he's running for the job. And they say, well, that sounds good, tell me more. Well, why do I tell you more? He's right there. Hey, can you come over, Mike? And he'll run across the street. And that was one less red, one more green. That's his style. So let's give him a good round of applause.
Oh, thank you for that kind introduction. Thank you all for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that we're on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, and this is Williams Treaty Land. And I think it's so critically important at this particular moment in time that we have an Indigenous worldview as we think of the important issues that we are making decisions on right now and how that will not only affect ourselves, but our children and our grandchildren in the next 7 generations. And I just want to take a moment to express my deep and heartfelt appreciation to the water protectors all across Canada, North America, and around the world. Whether they're on the front lines of the battle against Kinder Morgan, or Keystone in the US, or Line 9 right here in Ontario. Or the water protectors at the Teton Pit I visited last weekend, where a quarry is going to be expanded, and it threatens the cleanest aquifer in the world. Whether it's the 17,000 or 1,700 people who signed a postcard that I delivered to the Minister of the Environment today, along with over 8,000 other signatures demanding that this government put water for people first, that water become a human right for people. And I know there are many environmentalists in this crowd. I'm looking at many of you, David Suzuki being the most prominent. There are many of you in this room tonight, and I want to thank you so much for your tireless work and your effort to protect the people and places we love in this province and around the world. And I just want to take a quick moment to just say a huge shout out to Karen and Jose, 2 amazing candidates here in Markham. And I know there are other Green Party candidates in the crowd, so if you could just raise your hand and just wave to the crowd. I'm so proud to be a part of a team that is saying we are going to fight for jobs that put people and planet first. I'm so proud to be a part of a team that says we have to end this myth that somehow there's a competition between jobs and the environment. Because here's the bottom line. Right now in Canada, 275,000 Canadians work in the clean energy sector. That's more people than work in the oil sands. We have to... You know, the NHL playoffs are happening right now, and Wayne Gretzky, the great one, became great because he skated to where the puck is going and not where it's been. And the puck is going to where the clean economy is. We have to end this myth that somehow we have to invest in fossil fuel infrastructure to finance the transition to a clean economy. Because we have the money right now to fund a clean economy. In this province, we are at a critical moment because we have run out of time to negotiate around climate action. It is time to leap into the future right now and create the low-carbon economy that's going to protect this planet for your children, my children, and the next 7 generations. And when we leap into that future, now, we have to make sure nobody is left behind. And so that is exactly why the Green Party of Ontario is going to fight for a basic income guarantee to create a floor that nobody will go below in terms of their economic security. That is why we are going to fight for everyone to have a place they can afford to call home. That is why we are going to fight for affordable, accessible public transit, electrified to connect and power our communities. That is why we are going to fight for streets that are safe for cyclists and pedestrians and our children to play in. And that is why we are going to fight to protect the places we love in this province. We're the only party that has the courage to stand up to the most powerful lobby in this province and say no to tripling your electricity prices to rebuild outdated, overpriced nuclear plants. We will say yes to putting this province on a pathway to be powered with 100% renewable energy in our children's lifetime. And I am still proud, but deeply saddened, actually, that I am the only political party leader in this province who has signed the Food and Water First Pledge to protect prime farmland and water sources in Ontario. I believe government has one of the most sacred responsibilities there is, and that's to protect what sustains life. And that's why I'm running for the Green Party of Ontario. That's why I became the leader of this party. And I don't know where James is. I did an interview with James, who's a young online journalist here. There he is, right there. He asked me why I got involved in politics. And I said to him, you know, James, I've always been interested in politics. And I became so disillusioned with the status quo. And I complained and complained about it. And so finally my two daughters, and I know Jose has two daughters, and my two daughters and my wife said to me, you have to stop complaining and do something about it. And so we now have an opportunity to change the status quo at Queen's Park. But the only way we're going to change the status quo is to vote for a new party with a new vision and a new way of doing politics. And that's the Green Party of Ontario. And so I look to Elizabeth May and what she has done to change politics in Ottawa. I look at David Kuhn in New Brunswick standing up against fracking. I look at Peter Beavenbaker, who's now doubled the Green Caucus on Prince Edward Island. And I look to Andrew Weaver and the 3 Green MLAs in British Columbia that are holding the NDP's feet to the fire, holding the balance of responsibility in the government and giving them a spine to say no to Kinder Morgan, say no to the LNG plants. And that's the change we need to bring to Queen's Park. And so with your help, the green wave that is sweeping across Canada and across the world will bring people-powered change to Queen's Park to change the status quo and have us leap into the future that will protect the people and places we love now. And so I encourage you, I ask you to join us over the next 50 days and elect Green MPPs to Queen's Park so we can protect your future, your planet, your home, Mother Earth. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the future MPP for Wealth, Mike Schreiner. So we're celebrating Earth Day, and our motto, we took it from Earth Day Canada. It's make Earth Day every day. It's a shame, and I'll be honest with you, I think it's a shame that we need to have a Green Party. All the other parties should be espousing the protection of the planet. And that's just the way it is. A few of us are going to have to be terribly stubborn to get to the finish line, which is on June 7th. But most importantly, those of us that are lucky to be selected by our local communities as their political representatives need to remember that achieving victory is something that is much, much more frequent than people making wise use of their victories. This was said by a Roman poet long, long time ago, and I paraphrase it here because it's a good way to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is a person that is a scholar among scholars. And it's a person that, at least I'm going to speak for myself, I aspire to be like. If I can reach age of 82 young, and I'm still with it, like David, I'm going to be a happy camper. Because I want to tell you something very personal that only a few people know. I had the honor a few years ago to be selected to become a member of the David Suzuki Foundation. That's where I met David. And they would remind me periodically, Jose, you beat over 150 candidates. You know, when I was kind of slacking off. And then we worked to phase out coal power in this province. People don't know, but we were very involved on that because that's 28 million tons of CO2 that don't go up the atmosphere every year. That's David. That's David's work. And he always, being the quintessential Canadian, says, no, it's not me. But you inspire us. And you're going to do that in a sec. I just want to share this very personal thing. I had the best job in Canada, working for the David Suzuki Foundation. I thought, I'll die on that job, you know, because there's no better job. I'm not going to expand why it's so awesome, but just imagine having the honor of talking to David periodically. That was just worth the price of admission. But then I got offered a job at a university called York University, you know, and I'm like, oh man, what do I do now, right? And I asked my lovely wife, what do I do? And she goes, your choice, boy. I don't want this one on me. And I'm like, who the heck do I ask, right? And then I realized that David Suzuki happened to be in Toronto. And it was magical. He actually got delayed. He was supposed to go to Montreal or Ottawa, I can't remember. And something happened called winter. It happens in this place quite often. We're right now in that white space. And, you know, he's marooned in the hotel. And I email him and say, David, I need to talk. And he goes, come over for breakfast, we'll talk about what you... And I say, David, this is the situation. I love my job on the David Suzuki Foundation, but I've been offered a professorship at York University, a tenure-track professorship.
You gotta go back and tell them who kicked your ass to get your PhD.
He did. He did. But one story at a time. So long story short, I'm sitting there in front of the almighty David Suzuki, and I put forward my case, and he looks at me and says, you're joking me, right? I'm like, no, I'm serious. And he goes, take the job. Tenure track positions are lottery tickets that actually have been seen in the future with winning numbers. So take the job. And I say, yeah, but David, I love the David Suzuki Foundation job. And he goes, you'll always belong to the foundation. You'll always be part of the movement, but you'll have the opportunity to shape minds. And there's quite a few of my students here. Maybe some of you can go like this, former students. Thank you. And he was right. Now, the job is not as much fun as working for the David Suzuki Foundation. My emails don't get replied as quickly. But what I've learned was that I kept doing the job. I didn't listen fully to David. I actually got hired on June 2007 to go to York University. And I kept working for an entire year, full-time for the David Suzuki Foundation. Sorry, David, I had to do it. I wasn't double dipping. I was just finishing with the cold phase-out. Worked full-time as a tenure-track professor, and I listened to David and completed my PhD. I used to have hair. I lost the hair in the process. It's okay. My son has the hair now, and I go, gosh, I don't know if it was worth it. And, but my point is, in this very long story, is that David's advice needs to be really, really heard. Because this is a guy that has the most incredible story. I mean, he hates when we introduce him like this, but David, I'm sorry, man. You're 82 years young, and you're gonna regale us now. I know you're going to enlighten us with whatever it is you want to tell us. And I ask one favor and one favor only. Let's give him an awesome round of applause.
Wait till I'm finished. No, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here tonight. Thank you, Jose. That was, where is Jose? Oh, a very generous introduction. One of the things I've felt with the David Suzuki Foundation, which I'm very, very proud to have been a part of, is that we have quite a high turnover. We're too small to hold people indefinitely because they want to do more and they're ambitious, and so they have opportunities like Jose's. But I feel part of what the Suzuki Foundation is doing is providing people like that who have a background training and perhaps learn a different way of seeing the world to go out and I still feel that Jose is part of the family that is the Suzuki Foundation, and very proud of that fact, and that's why I wrote him and said, hey, I'm going to be in Toronto just before Earth Day because I'm going down to Guelph. And if you can make use of that time, please do, because he's part of my family. Thank you very much for coming out. It's such a beautiful day today. I think it's been 3 weeks since I've seen the sun in Vancouver. So it's a delight to see that and be here today. I am 82, and at my age, you know, you get all crusty and cynical, and so I look at politics in a very, very different way. And what I understand now is the problem with politicians is politics. Good people run for all of the parties, but they get caught up in politics, and politics determines that once elected, the very first job, the first priority is to get reelected. And then, of course, the party imposes the limits on what you can or cannot do or say. So politics itself is a constraint. Just let me give you some background. My mother and father were born in Vancouver, Dad in 1909, my mother in 1911. My grandparents came from Japan between 1904 and 1906. So my mom and dad had been raised in Canada, never been to Japan, but of course in 1941 when Pearl Harbor happened, Canada then in 46 applied the War Measures Act and declared that we were no longer subject to the rights of Canadian citizenship. But even up until then, my grandparents and my parents couldn't vote. If you were an Asian, Chinese, Japanese, whatever, you couldn't vote, even if you're born and raised in the country. We were wiped out by the war, and we moved to British Columbia. Didn't want any more Japanese in the province, so we either were told, get the hell out of here and go to Japan, or go east of the Rockies. And so we ended up in Ontario. When they got the right to vote, my parents in 48, I always regarded that as a tremendous responsibility and a privilege to be able to vote. I have voted in every federal election since I turned 21. And until 20, no, you haven't waited for the kicker. Until 2015, I never voted for a party that won power. And that's why I voted in 2015 strategically. Elizabeth has never forgiven me for this. Fortunately, the person I voted for, who was a Liberal, was a good candidate, Joyce Murray. She's great. But I voted, I've been a Green voter for years now, but I voted in desperation because of the tyranny of the Harper years. So when Trudeau was was elected. Of course, the sun came out. And I have 4 daughters. When he said gender equity in cabinet, I said, wow, that is fantastic. And he's done it. And that was a really important thing. But his big promise to me was, you will never vote first past the post, in a first past the post system again. And he said it not only before the election, but after it. He repeated it. And then, of course, political sense came to him, and he realized, whoa, that's going to give up a lot of our opportunity to be a majority party. And so he then wrote it off. And that, to me, was when I realized the trouble with politicians is politics. He went to Paris, and boy, was that wonderful. After 9.5 years of Harper, he went to Paris, not only signed the agreement, but said, we aspire to trying to keep temperature below or closer to 1.5 than 2. That's a very, very tough target. We celebrated. I emailed him and I said, are you serious about Paris? He said, absolutely, I'm serious. So it was great. And then he approved of pipelines. Not only Kinder Morgan, but he approved Line 3, which is going to hook up with the Keystone. I think politically, we knew that the Northern Gateway was dead. The indigenous people had said, and it wasn't going through. But he knew he's going to take a shit kicking in Vancouver over Kinder Morgan. Meanwhile, there's nothing being said about Line 3 that's going to go down. Trump has passed Keystone, and it's going to hook up. That is the most cynical political ploy I can imagine. So that's when I emailed him. He replied to my emails until I emailed when he approved the pipelines, and I said, why did you run for office? Didn't you run for office so you could be in a position to do something to protect your children's future? You have young children, and you've just made a decision that is going to reverberate through the lives of your children. Surely your children come before politics. And that's when he stopped replying to my emails. I just want to give you some background. One of the eminent climatologist in Canada is Andrew Weaver. He's the head of the Green Party in British Columbia. I was amazed when he gave up his academic position to run as a Green. And it was astonishing that he won. He's been a magnificent, I think, member of the legislature. But I said, look, you guys need more, you need more weight, heft. And I will help you campaign if you limit me to candidates who really have a serious shot at winning. And never imagined in my wildest dreams that they would not only elect 3, but hold the balance of power. I mean, what? So, of course, magnificent. But let me tell you, Site C, the dam at Site C on the Peace River, I have been fighting now. The first time I went up north to fight for Site C was 1981. Weaver said when he ran, he opposed Site C. Horgan said he opposed Site C. But Horgan didn't take power and then immediately cancel Site C. He set up a committee to look at it. He wanted an excuse. And in the end, the committee said it doesn't make economic sense. But he went ahead and approved the site, the dam. Now, the reason I raise this is that Andrew Weaver, who I supported and got elected so that he would do the right things, said, I'm not going to bring the government down in order to protect Site C. And the reason is that his highest priority is to get proportional representation. Because without proportional representation in the next election, he's going to be reduced to nothing. I mean, he may get members elected, but it'll either be a Liberal or an NDP majority. So politics again intruded. That area that is going to be flooded should be the breadbasket of the North. It's the major farming area. And our food chain, with climate change, we can't have a food chain where food is grown thousands of miles from where it's ultimately eaten. We have to eat much more closely. And as a climatologist, Weaver should know that. But politics intruded. We've been working on climate change. Jose was working with us on climate change for years, way before the Kyoto conference. And the head of our climate group was a man named Jerry Scott. And for years we were saying, you know, we've got to have a carbon tax and we've got to reduce fossil fuels. Jerry then, just before the election, this is a couple elections ago, left the foundation to go and be one of the guides for the NDP. And so I was delighted, you know, the head of our climate change guy going now to be a thinker for the NDP. And what did he come up with? Axe the tax. Gordon Campbell, a liberal, but liberal means conservative in British Columbia, the head of the Liberal Party, totally unexpectedly brought in a carbon tax, which British Columbia is very proud of and brags about. And Jerry Scott knew very well that that's what we have to put a price on carbon. It's a very effective tool. And axe the tax became politics. The problem with politicians is politics. It was an economic or a political opportunity, he thought, and I'm absolutely convinced that they lost that election. They were poised to take over. They lost the election because of that hypocrisy. There were enough people that cared about that tax and supported the Liberals. So, you know, what the hell is there a Green Party for? The problem with the Green Party is everybody acts as if, well, the Greens are the ones worried about the environment. And with, you know, the Conservatives, they're the party of economics, and the Liberals, I don't know what they are. But the point is, as Jose said, there shouldn't be a Green Party. That's crazy. It's not the purview of a political party. It should be the foundation of all parties, should be to protect the air. But having said that, thank God the Greens are here, because they have been the voice. And Andrew has been effective. I'm convinced that in order to keep the government we have in BC, Andrew made an agreement with the NDP that they wouldn't bring them down if certain conditions were met, and one of them was no to Kinder Morgan. Horgan would have caved a long time ago, but thanks to the Greens, he's stayed very, very strong, and that's been, thank you, Andrew and the Greens, for that. And I think of Elizabeth May. Thank God for Elizabeth. I mean, she is single-handedly, but you know, she can't do it. We need sustainable activism, and as a one member, there's too much pressure on her. We've got to get more people in there to relieve some of the burden. I am absolutely sure when Harper was passing these omnibus bills, which is so undemocratic, load up these huge bills, right? Elizabeth was the one person in Parliament that read every bloody page. So, you know, an astounding performance. I'm sorry, I had a whole speech written here, but I got kind of pulled off. I'm here to support Jose, and I'm here to support you. It's your event tomorrow I'm going to, right? Yes. And Elizabeth said, you've got a real shot. You bloody well better win this. Yes. But I want to explain why I'm still willing, even though I'm you know, cynical about the politicization of candidates, why I'm still here to support Jose and Mike and Andrew. And that is that we are at an absolutely critical moment. In the 3.9 billion years that life has existed on this planet, there has never been a single species able to have the impact that human beings are now having on the planet. That's why scientists now say the period from about 1945 on is what is called a new geological epoch, a geological moment in time. The Anthropocene epoch is when humans have become the major force shaping and altering the physical, chemical, and biological properties of the planet on a geological scale. It's congruence, the very sudden congruence of a number of factors. One is our numbers. We're a sheer force of human numbers. We are the most numerous mammal on the planet. And every one of us has to be fed, clothed, and sheltered, and that gives us an enormous, what's called an ecological footprint. It takes a lot of air, water, and land just to keep every one of us alive. But of course, we're not just another mammal like a rabbit or a mouse or a rat. We have an enormous amount of technology, most of which has been developed within the last century, that we can use to exploit the planet, to explore every nook and cranny in search of something we can use. And technology then amplifies our ecological footprint enormously. And ever since World War II, we've been afflicted with an incredible appetite for stuff. We love to shop. And there was a survey in the United States where 98% of teenage girls consider shopping their number one recreation. So I guess you exercise at the same time you're choosing what to buy. And the terrible, my family hates it when I bring this up, but it really makes me sick. We used to, when after the war, my family we were destitute. We had nothing. But I was in a growth phase. I was just entering my teen years, and I needed a coat. When we moved to Ontario, my God, they have this stuff called snow. So my parents had to scrape together and bought me a new coat. But I was in a growth spurt, and I outgrew that coat in a matter of months. It went to my twin sister, Marcia. And Marcia wore it for a couple of years, and then she outgrew it, and it went to our next sister, Aiko. So my parents used to boast, this coat went through 3 kids. Because they were boasting what a great buy that was. It's durable, And now, that's crazy, right? I mean, the thought that one coat would be used, you got to be fashionable, right? I was told just yesterday there's one big fashion line that used to have their annual presentation of their new line. And then it became seasonal, like there was a fall line and a winter line. And then now they have a new line every week, right? I wore blue jeans all the time up until a few years ago because blue jeans wear like iron. And now I see people who are walking down the street in blue jeans they paid hundreds of dollars for that are full of rips. What the hell is that? To me, every time I see it, I can't tell you, it's like a kick in the stomach. Because what it is saying, I don't give a shit about the earth. I just want to look good. Well, I don't think it looks good. But this whole idea that fashion is driving clothing now in such a wasteful way is a statement about what the crisis is. Our consumptive habits. My mom and dad were married during the Great Depression. And that was what shaped their way they looked at the world and their values. And because of that, they pounded into my head, live within your means. Share, don't be greedy. Help your neighbors, you may one day need their help. Save some for tomorrow. And they used to say you have to work hard for the necessities in life, but you don't run after money as if the stuff you buy makes you a bigger, more important person. But we are way past the necessities. 70% of the Canadian economy is there to serve our wants. It's about consumption. And that was a deliberate thing that happened. We went through a very terrible time during the Great Depression of the 30s. What pulled us out of the war, out of the Depression, was World War II. Wars are great for getting economies going. You got to pump out planes and guns. And the American economy then, because they weren't fighting in America, blazed white hot. But by 1944, the Americans realized we're going to win this war. But what kind of an economy do we have in peacetime? And so the president set up the American Council of Economic Advisors and said, How do we transition from a wartime economy to a peacetime economy? And the answer was consumption. Get Americans to buy stuff, use them up, throw them away, and buy more stuff. Americans should worship at the altar of consumption. And it worked. And so we're in a position where consumption is driving our economy. You know, and in the past, if you got tuberculosis, they said you had consumption, right? Consumption was destroying your body. But this is one of the big things that's happened, is this huge acceleration in our consumptive habits. And as I passed up, driving up here, looking at these, whoa, unbelievable, on good farmland, all of these homes that you guys are living in. And you know, 40 years ago, when the population, the average size of a family was twice as big, the average size of a house was half as big. So today you have fewer people living in bigger homes. And why? Because we got so much stuff to put in it. You know, so we have to look at the way we're living. This is so totally unsustainable, the way that we're living all across the country. And of course, we have a global economy now that is just driving us right into the ditch. So when you add those things together, our numbers, our technology, our consumption, and our global economy, we have become a force as has never been on the planet. Life has always modified the planet. Before plants evolved on this planet, there was no oxygen in the atmosphere. Oxygen is a very highly reactive element. When there's oxygen, it immediately reacts or oxidizes things. So before there were plants, there was no oxygen. It was plants over millions and millions of years that transformed the atmosphere into the oxygen-rich one we have. It was life that helped to wear down mountains and boulders and create soil. Life has been a huge part of the change in the planet's properties. But over millions of years and countless species involved in the process. This moment is unique because we are at the heart of everything. We are at the heart. We have this enormous power, but we don't know enough to manage the impact of what we're doing. Just want to remind you, you know, keep hearing technology. Well, technology is going to solve it. Well, in the 1930s, a man named Paul Mueller, working for Searle, I think in Geneva, or in Switzerland, discovered that DDT kills insects. Wow. Was that a great discovery? We gave him a Nobel Prize in 1948 for that discovery. But then years later, Americans began to notice their great iconic bird, the American eagle, was disappearing. They said, what the hell is going on? And they discovered a phenomenon that science didn't even know about called biomagnification. You spray in concentrations per million that's absorbed by microorganisms who are eaten by bigger organisms, and at each level up the food chain, you concentrate it. So by the time you get to the fatty tissue in the shell glands of birds, that affects the eggshells, or the breasts of women, you've concentrated DDT hundreds of thousands of times. And over again, we find we don't know enough to really know what the implications of our technologies will be. When atomic bombs were dropped on Japan, we didn't know there was a thing called radioactive fallout. That was discovered over Bikini years later. We didn't know about electromagnetic pulses of gamma rays that knock out electric circuits. We didn't know about nuclear winter. When CFCs began to be used, we didn't have any idea that they would begin to weaken the ozone layer. Over and over again, we think technology is going to get us out of the hole that we created. But we don't have the humility to say we don't know enough to do that. And I fear that our inability to take climate change seriously in order to to begin to reduce our emissions seriously, is leading us to where the only choice we'll have in a few years will be geoengineering. We've got to take over the planet's atmosphere and try to engineer it so that we can live at a comfortable temperature. And believe me, we don't know enough to do that. But that is the technological. Now, we do need technology. There's no question about it. But I think that we have to be a lot more humble, acknowledge our ignorance, and rather than just think, I'm going to come up with the best solution, go to nature and say, how the hell do you do it? You know, every species has the same problems, right? We got to get food, we got to excrete our waste, we got to find a mate, we got to have kids, we got to feed them, we've got to protect them. Well, every species has a problem. How do you do it? This is a phenomenon Janine Benyus has called biomimicry. Have more humility, ask nature how they've solved problems, and then we can try to copy that. And the thing I feel, every time I fly over BC's forests, I look out of the plane and all I see is every green thing saying, give it to me. Because that's the source of everything. Then you fly over Vancouver or Toronto and all you see is the flat roofs of warehouses, houses, streets, sidewalks. You know, all those surfaces should be gathering solar energy. And we've got to be clever enough to do that. Let's become like we've got to become like a forest, you know, rather than have these heroic measures to solve it. So our problem is that today, I think, is that we live in a world where we can't see the magnitude of the problems we've created. For 95% of human existence, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers. We followed animals and plants through the seasons. And when you're carrying everything you own on your own back, you know that your very survival and livelihood depends on nature. Nature is the source of everything when you're a nomadic hunter-gatherer. 10,000 years ago, we began that huge revolution in the way we live with the agricultural revolution. But farmers understand very well, you know, pollination, nitrogen fixation by certain species. Winter snow is related to the amount of soil, moisture in the soil in the summer. Farmers understand weather and climate are a critical part of who they are and how well they do. Farmers know we're deeply embedded in nature. I believe it's been the shift from farming to big city dwelling that has resulted in a real blindness on our part. When you know, I have a friend who lives in North York. He said, my apartment building is completely air conditioned. I go down the elevator in the morning into the basement, into my air conditioned car, drive down the Don Valley Freeway into the basement of my commercial building, completely air conditioned, and that building's connected through tunnels to all the shopping areas. He said, David, I don't have to go outside for weeks. So do you think then that you're connected or understand our dependence, our embeddedness in the natural world? We live in an urban setting where your highest priority becomes your job, right? We need a job to earn the money to buy the things we want. And so you see the ultimate expression of that in Stephen Harper, who said, we can't do anything about reducing emissions, it'll destroy the economy. So he elevated the economy above the very atmosphere that gives us weather, climate, the seasons, the air that we breathe. That's insanity, if you ask me. But that's the problem. And because we live in cities, we're no longer as aware of what's going on in the world, in the environment. I thought I'd just report a few things that have really stunned me. Last year, as you know, the Cancer Agency announced half of all Canadians are going to develop cancer. If that isn't a shock and a wake-up, what the hell is going on? And this year, I've forgotten which agency it was, we were told that 1 out of every 66 Canadian youth between 5 and 16 years of age has autism spectrum disorder. Well, what the hell do we expect? You know, I spent 30 years of my life as a geneticist studying fruit flies. And one of our great discoveries, we discovered a mutation affecting nerves, nerve mutant. And it was spectacular. And I got a big government grant to study this mutant. And because the nerves in fruit flies are the same as the nerves in us. So you think about that now. We have the same nerves. We study fruit flies to learn about ourselves. Why is it that the pesticides we're now using are nerve toxins? And then we wonder, holy cow, we've got an outbreak of autism? What the hell do we expect? We are the earth. Whatever we do to the air, water, soil, we do directly to ourselves. So do we think that when we spray poisons onto plants and animals, that that's not going to affect us? We're biological creatures. We're subject to the same kinds of responses as any other biological organism. You and I, there isn't a single person in this room who could go to a doctor and get tested and not find every one of us is carrying dozens of toxic chemicals in our bodies. Well, what do you expect? We're eating food that's covered with it. It's inside the food that we're eating. We're spraying it onto land, air, and water. That's where the connectedness with nature is necessary. We can't escape it unless we want to live in a bubble all our lives. 3/4 of the insect species in Germany are reported to have been eliminated in 20 years? I used to be an avid insect collector when I was a boy. I loved beetles. And when I read that, I said, oh my God, that's horrific. That is amazing. After the war, we ended up living in Leamington, Ontario. And every spring, there was a hatch of mayflies out of the lake. So prolific, they covered entire houses with their bodies. And you couldn't see outside because it'd be covered, your windows would be covered. They would cover the highways and cars would skid on their carcasses and have accidents. They would pile up on the beaches, 3-4 feet thick. All of that biomass and the fish. I was a fisherman too. I'd just go out and catch fish one after another. They were in a feeding frenzy. And that biomass was gone in 10 years because farmers began to use pesticides in a big way, and they washed into the waters of Lake Erie. Canada's monarch butterfly, an iconic species, has been in catastrophic decline. And I don't know if you saw day before yesterday that the woodland caribou, the Selkirk herd, has now been reduced to 3 females. It's extinct. It's gone. And yet we keep looking, what's the cause? Is it the wolves? Hey, fella, look in the goddamn mirror at what the cause is. We're not willing. So, well, I've totally ruined my speech. How much time do I have now? I started to get interested in the history of the way that we treat crises that evolve. And I thought, I want to look at the history of asbestos. Asbestos has been known and used by people for over 4,000 years. But it was really in the 1800s that asbestos, which is this long fibrous material, very heat resistant, water resistant, it's an amazing mineral. And in the 1800s, people began to make cloth out of asbestos. And it was great, if you made asbestos napkins and got dirt, you just throw it in the fire, and then you could pull it out after, and the napkin was clean because it was fire resistant. And in 1870, asbestos has been mined around the world. Australia was the biggest producer. But in 1870, a big deposit of asbestos was discovered in the Thetford Hills in Quebec. And very quickly, people began to say, this is Canada's white gold, this magic stuff. And boy, we began to pump it out and mine it and make products, use it for a lot of insulation against sound, against temperature. And it was a big money generator for Quebec. In 1899, you get the first report that there seems to be health problems with the miners, 1899. And then in 1924, you got the first actual naming of the problem that miners are having, called asbestosis. People were getting lung cancer from asbestos. In 1930, the United Kingdom reported that 66% of miners who had mined asbestos for more than 20 years, 66% developed asbestosis. So it was a potent, but you had to be exposed to it for a long period of time. Australia was a leading company, a country that was mining asbestos, but by the 1970s, everybody knew it was a dangerous material. The EU then, in 1983, even Australia stopped mining asbestos. It phased it out in 1989 and finally banned it in Australia in 2003. Now in Quebec, asbestos became a big part of the economy of Quebec. In the 1920s, Canadian insurance companies said, we're not gonna give you insurance for asbestos miners. It's dangerous. So in 1966, a McGill professor was given a $500,000 grant from the Asbestos Mining Association. And guess what? He reported that no, asbestos doesn't cause cancer. Whoever pays the piper calls the tune. In the 1990s, in 1984, the Ontario Royal Commission recommended phasing out asbestos. 1984. In 1990s, Canada sued the French government for their banning of asbestos, trying to overturn the French ban. In 2006, Canada vetoed a move by the UN to ban asbestos. Canada in 2007 began a study of the effects of asbestos. 2008, they said it's got to be peer reviewed. 2009, the report said asbestos causes lung cancer. And in 2011, the Canadian Cancer Society and 25 other health organizations begged the Canadian government to ban asbestos. In 2012, a year later, Quebec put $58 million into the asbestos mine called the Jeffrey Mine. And it's only in 2018 that Canada has finally banned all products. So you see, the terrible thing is once you have an economic opportunity and it begins to be widely used, it becomes very difficult, despite all of the negative evidence, it becomes very difficult to phase it out. Carbon is now the new asbestos. We need carbon to live, but now what we're doing with, you all know, our dependence so heavily on fossil fuels, we're overwhelming the planet's capacity to reabsorb the carbon that we generate through the burning of fossil fuels. And we're cutting down the best carbon remover there is, called trees, at a phenomenal rate. So this double whammy then, huge output of carbon through burning of fossil fuels and destruction of carbon removal systems has created the problem. I was going to go into the history of what we've done on climate change, but I don't have time to do that. I just want to remind you one thing in the past. In 1973, the OPEC countries, what is OPEC? Oil-producing export countries. The OPEC countries began to turn off the spigot. And for those of you that are old enough to remember, that was a frightening time because the price of fuel skyrocketed and there were shortages. We had to line up at gas stations for the pump. And of course, Americans began to shoot each other. That's the way they solve problems. But Canada said, holy cow, we don't have any kind of plan about energy in this country. And so they appointed one of our eminent scientists to head a commission, Ursula Franklin, said, what do we do about this? And I thought it was you, Dorothy. In 1978, Ursula released her report called Canada as a Conserver Society and said we have to use our resources much more efficiently and carefully, and we should become world leaders in renewable energy. And the Canadian response was classic. Thank you, Dr. Franklin, a very good study. Put it on the shelf. Next, what's the next? We forgot it. Denmark, on the other hand, said, we got problems. Windmills. And guess what one of the big part of their economy is? It's windmills. So we should look to that history and ask ourselves, why are politicians incapable of responding in the right way. We're great at responding when there's a crisis. When there's blood on the ground, by God, do we respond. But something like climate change, which seems to be, well, I did the first show on global warming back then in 1989, and I called it a slow motion catastrophe. So we knew about climate change back then, but we really I thought it was decades away. I was more focused on clear-cut logging and pollution and dams on rivers. That was my priority. I thought we had time to work out the issue of climate change. But now, of course, we know it's happening, and we've clearly passed the target of 1.5. We will never keep the temperature below that. And the 2 degree target that's in the Paris Agreement looks increasingly difficult to achieve. So, we're in this crazy situation where, in fact, what is to come is going to reverberate very, very heavily through the lives of our children. And I'll tell you a story I told for the first time last night, and that is my youngest daughter, and her family are living with me right now in our house. And they moved in with us in September so that they could have twins. And just a story about that. It's a boy and a girl. And I said, oh, that's great. We'll name the girl Rachel and the boy Carson, after my hero. My wife said, absolutely not. Because my last girlfriend before I met Tara was named Rachel. And Tara used to call her Rachel Ratchet. And I said, Tara, you're like a goddamn elephant. You don't forget. That was 50 years ago. But she's still, so she's not named Rachel. But I thought about it. But I was sitting in our kitchen holding both babies at the same time. And being a grandfather is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. And this is the first time that this ever happened. I began to weep. And of course, my wife and daughter grabbed the babies right away, and they're saying, what's wrong? And then I began to wail. I've never done this in my life. I wailed uncontrollably for over 10 minutes because I realized these kids don't have a chance of living a full life. That's a reality. Environmentalists tell us what's coming, and we believe what we're saying. We're not just raising fears so that we'll get more support. We're headed and then my grief turned to anger that people we elect to guide us into the future know full well what's coming and are still, in the name of corporate interest, still serving the economy and the things that are destroying the very life support systems of the planet. So this is the challenge we face. I'm over that now. I'm accepting that we're living in this time when my grandchildren may very well die prematurely because life is going to get very difficult. But it gives all the more urgency. We've got to quit fooling around. This is a very urgent crisis. We have to attack now. And we've got to stop people like Trudeau and McKenna from taking all these nice selfies and saying the right things. We need action on their part. And that's what you're here to say. We don't have time now for the green philosophy and view to be a part of every party. And so this is a moment where we need Greens desperately because we've got the crisis of all times facing us. So please, all of you, support these candidates. Mike apparently has a good shot at it. I'm going down to help him tomorrow. But Jose, I'm there because Jose is part of my family, and I'm there to support him whenever I can. I hope that you will go out and become ambassadors, and you, if each of you could convince 3 people to support the Greens, that's the beginning of something big. And I I watched all day as that march in Washington, organized by the kids from Parkland in Florida. And I just cried all day, tears of joy at those young people. And this is, please, all of you, think about those young people. This is all about a future for them. And the Greens are the only party right now that has recognized that and put that up as the highest part of their agenda. Please support the candidates.
Wow. Happy Earth Day. That's exactly what we're going to do now, because we Greens do things differently. We're now going to turn around. I'm going to ask my friends to grab your chairs and come over here, and we're going to start questions. I got you. I got your back. We got people in social media, too, that have asked questions already, and we're going to take the time to answer your questions. So a little bit of housekeeping. If you see a person with a green T-shirt, they're one of us. And this form that you see here, we printed in recycled paper, but we need you to fill it up. You either have time or you have money, or you're lucky and you have money and time. In which case, we need you to do what David asked you, because if we organize in the few days until June 7th, we will achieve a victory here in Markham, Stouffville. It is possible. I've been a Canadian since 1989. This is the first time that I've seen what I see right now, a complete dissatisfaction at the status quo. And that's where we come and say, you don't need to go red, you do not need to go blue. And if you don't like them oranges, go green. Thank you. So do I have a little video up here from a person that asked a question? Is that possible to show? Not a video. Okay, I'll read it. Konstantin Christonis from Toronto. We heard during the 2008 financial crisis that fat cat polluting corporations and banksters are too big to fail. We heard that those companies and their shareholders should be bailed out by taxpayers and central banks to the tune of not billions but trillions of dollars. Do you agree with me that it is really the planet that is too big to fail? That it is our children that are too big to fail? And that it is every living thing on this green earth that is too big to fail? Do you agree with me that it's time to unleash the titans? Do you agree with me that we should bail out of the planet, not banksters, and unleash central bank money to build a green infrastructure that replaces fossil fuel everywhere? What do you think? Yes. Next question. We have a little video.
My name is Carolina. Hello, my name is Carolina, and I want to know what was the main motivating factor in your becoming a climate change expert. Bye, greetings from Chile.
So Carolina is a young engineering student from Chile, and we're piping live in YouTube, and she posed that question. And I asked her, who's that question for? It's a question for David. So the question is, why did you become a climate change activist? You want to give it a kick?
Well, I mean, isn't it obvious?
Yeah.
I'm a father and I'm a grandfather. And
simple answer.
yeah.
So I asked Carolina who that question was for, and it was for David and me. And I'm going to tell you right now, I promised this young man here to let him ask a question, and I told him I was going to tell all of you how we solve climate change. There's 4 solutions to climate change. Number 1, we have to go 100% renewable energy. No question about it. With a community focus, otherwise we're not going to go beyond where we're at, which is 20% at the moment. 75% is fossil fuel, it's destroying the planet. 5% or thereof, it's nuclear, and you saw what happened in Fukushima. We don't want that to happen in Pickering, and that's why we're running here to get rid of those things. And we have flyers about this from Dorothy. Solution number 2 is we need to stop using combustion engines. We need electric transportation. Thank you. Good news is that we have all the technology from trains down to trucks, cars, motorcycles, automobiles. And if we power those fleets with 100% renewable energy, we're going to be able to stabilize emissions. Those 2 solutions will stabilize the emissions. The third one, David alluded to. We need now, there's no other way, we need geoengineering at a massive scale. Hang on. The only good massive geoengineering is to reforest the planet. And notice I say reforestation, that means forests, not plantations, not monocultures. We need to use our science and technology to try to do what David said, biomimicry, so we can have forests taking up CO2 out of the atmosphere. We do those 2 first things, 100% renewables, no more combustion engines, we stabilize emissions. Then we reforest like there's no tomorrow, we take CO2 out of the atmosphere. The 4th solution is why we're here, because we need new politicians that will not take no for an answer and talk less about things like NAFTA and more about things like treaties with countries like Chile, Costa Rica, Uruguay that are going for 100% renewable energy. That's why I want to be a politician. That's why Mike wants to be a politician. We will do that. We will work every day to try to solve those 4 solutions to climate change. And we can do it. I was trained by a climatologist that in the 90s used to say to me, Jose, we're in the Titanic and we saw an iceberg. And I would say to him, Danny, this is a problem that humans are doing by burning fossil fuels and destroying habitat like forests and pastures.
Let me add something to that. That is, I went to college in the United States in 1954, and I got my education, post-secondary education, in the United States for 8 years. I studied in the US. I decided in 1962 I didn't want to live in the country any longer. I wanted to come home to Canada. But in 1957, I was beginning my senior year in college, and on October 4th, 1957, is anyone here old enough to remember what happened then? Sputnik. We were shocked. I didn't know there was a space program. And every hour and a half, that beep, beep, beep of the satellite would pass overhead as a reminder. And meanwhile, the Americans got their rockets and they launched their Army, Air Force, and Navy rockets. Everyone blew up. And meanwhile, the Russians launched the first animal in space, a dog, Laika. The first man, Yuri Gagarin. The first team of cosmonauts. The first spacewalk. The first woman, Valentina Tereshkova. Americans didn't flinch. They didn't say, oh, Christ, they're way too far ahead of us. We can't afford to catch. They just poured money into it. And even though I was a Canadian, all you had to do was say, I like science, and they threw money at you. It was a glorious time. And in 1961, John F. Kennedy said, we're going to get American astronauts to the moon and back within a decade. And of course, he achieved it. They're the only country that did it. When he made that announcement, nobody had any idea how they were going to do it. He just made the commitment. But think of what happened. Not only are they the first and only country to get to the moon and back, but they, every year, NASA publishes a magazine called Spin-Off. And it's full of new technologies that have spun off from the space program. Space blankets, ear thermometers, laptop computers. I mean, the list is amazing. Nobody knew that that would happen. All they were saying is, we got to get these guys to the moon and back. And every year when Nobel Prizes are announced, guess who gets most of them still? They're scientists either living in America or they're Americans. Because in 1958, the Americans said, we got to catch up to these guys. And in 1961, they said, we got to beat them. You make the commitment and then you pour everything into it. And I keep saying when I go to the States, it's un-American to say, oh, we can't do anything about climate change, it'll destroy the economy. That's not the American way. And it's very clear it's the Canadian way. Trudeau gets out at Paris and goes, yeah, we're signing the Paris Agreement and we want to keep it to 1.5, and then he does bugger all because he's not committed to the target. You commit to the target, all kinds of things become possible. Public transit, renewable energy, electric cars, all kinds of things that are available become real possibilities. You gotta make the commitment and then focus all of your energy on that. There's no room for pipelines in a society that is committed to keeping temperature below 1.5. This is our opportunity.
Good news is we got Americans by choice like Elon Musk, that it's building this gigafactory to make solar power electric cars. This is happening. It's not technology that it's missing, it's political commitment. And on that note, I want to pass the microphone to a young man that it's called James. James called like this, and a very young activist that has a very good question for David.
So the current generation is really greedy and is just being greedy, and that greed is destroying the planet for the younger generation. So what can we as a younger generation do to help and fix the problem of greed? And what can I do to help fix the problem of greed? Because I notice it as a really big problem.
For David, right?
Well, I certainly think greed is a part of it, and that is in large measure, it's because of the commitment after World War II to the idea that consumption has to be the base of our economy. And so, we met today with a representative from Apple. Apple is now powering their plants with 100% renewable energy, which is fantastic. But then when I said, why is it we have to have new models all the time? And why is it we don't buy the really sturdy cell phone or whatever, and then every year just take the chip out and put a new one in? Like, what the hell? We have to, anyway, she said, well, we have to keep up with the public's demand for, I said, bullshit. You're creating the need for change. I don't think people are really like that. I loved, when I got a cell phone, and it was way after everybody was using cell, I loved my little flip phone because it was a telephone. I didn't want to have my whole frickin' office in my phone. But they created that possibility, and then people feel, oh, wow, I need that, and then I need more apps, and I need more capacity. They're creating our sense that we need. So for James, that greed is really, in large part, that need for more stuff is being driven deliberately to create products that we want. So, pardon me? By the corporations, of course. Corporations now are running, our government runs on a corporate agenda because the government somehow feels if it's good for corporations, it'll be good for us. And I want everyone to understand corporations may do all kinds of wonderful things for us, but they exist for one reason only, to make money, period. The more and the faster, the better. And we can get an indication of what corporations are in the recent bailout of Bombardier. Bombardier, one of our big companies. Why is it that companies say, keep government off us, get out of our way, don't regulate us, let us go. But when they get into financial problems, they come begging for money. And what did Bombardier, I don't remember how much they got, but it was around $300 million. The Trudeau government gave to Bombardier. And what is the first thing they did when they got that money? They fired 10,000 workers around the world and gave their executives a 50% raise. That's what corporations, they don't care about us. They will fire 1,000 people to increase productivity, or not productivity, but marketability or whatever, to increase their money. They will fire people without, they don't feel any obligation to employ people to give them jobs. And the terrible aspect of this, I have two good friends who started supporting the David Suzuki Foundation very early on, Michael Budman and Don Green. They started, two Detroit boys that started a company called Roots. And Michael came to one of my talks and he said, David, I hear what you're saying, but he said, you know, if I were to go to a bank and say, my company has captured 8% of the garment market in Canada, 8%. We're making loads of money. Our employees are well paid. We don't need to increase our share of market. We just want to stay at that level, 8%. But I need a loan from the bank to increase or to improve our stores. He said, I won't get a loan from the bank because in our system, if you don't submit a business plan in which you're going to keep growing steadily, you're considered dying. Now, if ever there was a crazy economic system, one that believes that growth is possible forever, that's the creed of cancer cells. And the result with cancer or economics will be the same, death. So I would strongly urge a woman named Kate Rayworth visited our foundation for half a day. And she's written a book which I urge all of you to read. I have tried to read so many economics books. And by the third page, I'm either fast asleep or thrown it away saying, I don't understand a bloody thing they're saying. Kate's book is very readable. It's called Donut Economics. And it's a very, very exciting break from the traditional way of seeing economics and greed. So you guys.
Hi. My name's Kathy Reed. I'm from Ajax currently, formerly from Unionville, Markham. And I just want to thank you very much for your very poignant speech tonight. You didn't disappoint. I'm so glad I'm here to witness it. And I want to thank you for your question regarding greed, because as somebody with my background in the investment business, I'm now a horticulturalist, I see things from all points of view. And fundamentally, I've got two political questions. One, is it not how we measure what an economy is that is never, ever tackled in the media? It's never questioned that we're not including the health and sustainability of human and natural capital. It's not an externality. It's not included in living systems, and the health of it is not included in what we're talking about in jobs and economy. So everything conservatives, everything neoliberal economics is talking about is not fundamentally including that. And we're not talking about that. So all of us who are brave enough to even speak about politics in public, we're talking in silos. We're not talking about what an economy is. So I question, is that not something, why you're experienced in media, is it just not up for debate? Are they not allowed to talk about it? And then secondly, as a political question, I believe as well we should not have pipelines and the fossil fuels. However, if all of our pension funds are heavily invested, right, we can't tank the economy. So part of me is saying, why is somebody with the values of Justin Trudeau that we've seen raised, we know that obviously a good person, good values, he cares about his family too. Why can we not go there? Why can we not make that leap instantly? And why is there not more to the Greens? How do we do it without tanking the economy?
Yeah, well, I'll let Mike answer the green part, but I can tell you now the big problem for Justin and Rachel Notley, who know very well what climate change is there has been so much money invested in the tar sands. And if we stop, it really should be stopped, period. But you've got what they call stranded assets. All of that money is tied up there. Are they going to have to write it off? And the answer to me is, yeah, they got to write it off. But that's what is driving a lot of the agenda. I don't know what Greens offer as a way out.
Yeah, so I'm going to put it in the Ontario context because I know Elizabeth will talk about it in the federal context, but the same concept applies to nuclear power. So Ontario right now is on the verge of spending $14 to $32 billion rebuilding nuclear plants. And we will have the exact same problem if the government continues with this. In Ontario, we will have stranded nuclear assets. In the same way as Canada, we are going to have stranded tar sands assets. And so we have to stop. Like, this is why we're saying, like, right now, stop the rebuilds. We can get lower cost water power from Quebec. We can invest, thank you, Dorothy. We can invest in energy efficiency and conservation. We already have renewable technology now that can deliver power at a lower cost than rebuilt nuclear plants, but yet the nuclear lobby is so powerful in Ontario that it pushes the government to take actions that I think are both financially disastrous and environmentally disastrous at the same time. If you look at the Ontario budget that came out a couple weeks ago, and you know, one of the things I think that's different about Greens, and Elizabeth exemplifies this as well, I'm happy to compliment other political parties when they do good things, but I'll be critical when they do bad things. And so a good thing the Liberal government has done is actually bring in carbon pricing in Ontario. I may disagree, thank you. I may disagree with their method. I prefer just a straight, simple carbon tax and dividend system rather than cap and trade, which is, I think, overly bureaucratic and complicated. But I have to give them credit for bringing in a carbon price. But at the same time, you look at the budget that just came out, $5 billion a year for highways, $1 billion a year for corporate bailouts for fossil fuel dependent companies. Like, you just go on and you see how we're just tweaking at the edges rather than actually leaping forward. And the longer we tweak at the edges, the more we're going to have this challenge of stranded assets, which is actually going to threaten our pension funds. So the sooner we start transitioning out of this, the better it's going to be for us financially, short term and long term. And then I'll just close with one more thing, is one of the things we're advocating for is new economic measurements. So GDP is, I think, an awful way of measuring your economy, because if we have a flood tomorrow that wipes out Toronto, that'll actually be good for the economy, even though it's horrible for people, because it's going to increase our GDP to rebuild all that infrastructure that's lost. And so we need to start looking at other economic indicators, such as well-being index. We need to be looking at from a balance sheet perspective. The Suzuki Foundation has determined that ecosystem services in Ontario's Greenbelt alone is worth $85 billion a year. That doesn't show up in any economic index. Like, that should be on the province's balance sheet, because we're literally destroying that natural ecosystems and the services that it provides for us. And so we need a whole range of new economic measurements so we can actually measure what matters to people. Yeah.
Something interesting that I just saw the other day was that the Green Party in New Zealand, who have a number of elected officials there, and Green parties all over the world share the same green values, so we may not be connected, but we represent the same ideals. And the Green Party in New Zealand actually are implementing or introducing a bill to have the economy measured by other measurements other than the GDP. So things of, social well-being and welfare and that kind of thing. So they are starting to implement that now, and that change is happening because Greens are getting elected all over the world. So that's a really, really good point. Yeah.
I actually go to a university where we have one of the world's foremost economists that looks at the economy from a perspective of the nature of the planet, which is, this is a finite planet, and by the way, it's the only close by. So we've got no choice but to look after it. His name is Peter Victor. And I don't mean to go too long about this, but there's two things I want to say. One's going to sound very political, because it is. If you go for voteforjose.ca, the first endorsement to my campaign, we just launched that site today, it's by Peter Victor. And I urge you to visit the website so you can see when we're going to talk again about this, because every Friday we're going to have an event like this until the election's over. So we can show the people of Markham, Stouffville, what it actually means to do politics different. We're going to bring the brightest minds to Stouffville and Markham so we can talk about how to do politics properly. So what does it mean? Well, it means we got a world where the genuine progress indicator is being explained by a Canadian, Peter Victor, and our own country does not pay attention to this. We got a situation where this current government in Ontario created a new program called the Guaranteed Minimum Income, minimum wage. So this is a way to help people lift out of poverty. And they did a small, very small, I would say, case study of this, a pilot, to see how it works. And the results are coming independently verified. This works. So then Mike asked me, Jose, can you go and be in the budget lockup, which happened a few weeks ago. And I sat there and read 307 pages. That's how long this thing is. They literally lock you up in a room with 5 hours, no phone, no computer, and you read this. 307 pages. Here, the people that do the analysis is saying to you, this program works and it will lift people out of poverty. And they did not put one nickel onto this program. So then I start looking at other things in that budget. Like, for example, they have a section in page 280-something about women empowerment, And I'm looking at this, very nice written, nice pictures and all, but I'm looking at numbers, right? Because money talks, the saying, right? And in the lockup, you get this privilege that you can call anybody in the government to answer a question you may have about the budget. So my question was really simple. You have this document saying that you want to empower women. So how many people in the public service, how many women have a gap in pay with men that make the same job? And I want to know the data. Are you collecting the data? And if yes, what are you going to do with this? So finally, I put the question, and a bureaucrat comes from the Ivory Tower. Make no mistake, the Ivory Towers are right there in Queen's Park. And the guy comes and says, well, sorry, sir, but that question goes beyond the scope of the document. And I say, okay, fella, we're alone here. It's a budget lockup. Are you gathering this data? And he goes, no, we're not. And I'm like, and you're not even putting money. We know that women get paid less. And you're telling the private sector to correct this when you're not willing to do it in your own house, the public service? That's why we do things different as Greens. We work harder, and we will work harder for Markham, Stouffville, Guelph, and Thornhill if we get elected. And the best thing is we got people that can help us out, like David Suzuki.
So one of the interesting anecdotes was that Adam Smith is considered the father of modern economics. And he was single when he was in his 40s. He decided to write the book, Wealth of Nations. And he moved back home with his mummy. And every day he was writing this book, his mummy was feeding him his meals. His mummy was doing his laundry. And yet you don't see anything in the book seeing that this role may be a part of what keeps society going and maybe ought to be have been acknowledged in some way, but it wasn't. So when we founded the David Suzuki Foundation in 1990, it became very clear, we're trying to work with corporations and governments, that the economy itself was a problem, that there were some real problems. And we said, we need to have a conference that will look at the economy and ask questions like, what is an economy for? Are there no limits? How much is enough? What makes us happy? So I looked around, and lo and behold, the really profound thinkers in this were all women. So I wrote to Marilyn Waring, who wrote in New Zealand, who wrote As If Women Counted. I wrote to Vandana Shiva, who's an old friend of mine, Maud Barlow, Susan George in France, Hazel Henderson in Florida. And to my astonishment, every one of them accepted my invitation to have a conference. I couldn't raise a nickel. We were just beginning, and our foundation, my wife and I were funding the foundation. We couldn't raise the money for that conference. And yeah, it's a shame, but I think it's true even now. Kate Rayworth is one of the really original thinkers, and part of the reason is they've never been part of the inside, so they can see, I think, with much greater clarity. But women, I think, have a huge role now in designing the new donut economy that we have to head to.
David, there was a conference before Rio with all these women at it.
With all those women?
Yes, before Rio in Miami.
Okay.
There was a conference, Bella Abzug and
Right. So, and the economy was their focus. So Dorothy is saying there was a conference of women in Florida before Rio.
women's health and cancer prevention, all kinds
Yeah.
of easy products.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi. Hi, my name is Lou Mangos. I'm a Stouffville. I'm over here, Mr. Suzuki. 2 questions, socially and politically. 10 years ago, I was following the alternative health. And during my search, I came across an item called chemtrails. Now, can you tell us as laymen's what chemtrails are? And if you can now, since you're a grandfather, I remember taking courses in science, it gets a little technical. So if you can write little books to educate ourselves, I think that will be a progressive move on a scientific level to educate us. If people realize what chemtrails are, I think once we get educated, now it will empower us politically. So fighting the corporations without education is very difficult for us. So, Mr. Suzuki, can you enlighten us?
I don't believe in chemtrails as you do.
Okay.
Okay.
And politically, is there anything we can do to help not fight the
I don't
corporations?
know whether Jose has a different assessment.
So I think we have to follow science. And when you take that position, chemtrails haven't been proven. And so in the same way that climate change is undeniable, I mean, when you get 99.9% of scientists agree on anything, and my wife's an academic, and I can tell you most academics can't even agree on where to put the water cooler in the faculty lounge, let alone on something as profound as climate science. So that is what we have to act on, is what the science is telling us we have to act on. And so that's why addressing the climate crisis is our top priority, and we will follow the science in determining how we're going to do that, because I think politics should be guided by evidence.
Hello. My question is about democracy. Hi, I'm over here. My question is about democracy. Democracy, as we've seen in Russia, when Putin didn't like someone, he simply removed him so that he was not heard. If we are going to have democracy here in Ontario, Mike, how do you get to be on the debate, and what can all of us do to simply say, we would like to hear from you? Whether or not we'd like to vote for you, to have a pure democracy, we need to hear from everybody.
Well, thank you for that. So, the person who seems to be the most afraid to debate me is Doug Ford. So the person with the most bluster seems to have the most fear. But, I think the reason the status quo parties and the corporate media executives want to keep us out of the debates is that when Greens are in leaders' debates, Greens get elected. Because we're honest with people, we take on the challenges in an honest way, and we give you straightforward, real solutions to the challenges we're facing. And so what I'm going to ask this crowd is there's a few things you can do. One is there's an independent third-party group that has started a petition called fairdebates.ca. They've collected over 11,000 signatures already. They have endorsements from people from Liberals, NDP, Conservatives, prominent Canadians. I believe David Suzuki is one of those prominent Canadians, all calling for fair debates and the Greens to be included in it. So if you can, even the Premier of Ontario now has endorsed fair debates. So we have one of the three big political leaders who've endorsed it. So if you can sign the fairdebates.ca petition, and you can share it with everyone you know and get everyone you know to sign it, that's one. Two, we've started our own Green Party petition now, Mike at the Mike.ca, which collected 3,000 signatures in about 36 hours. So if you can sign that one, we need both of those petitions. But then the next thing you have to do, and this I'm really appealing to anybody in the audience who is a member of the Conservative Party or the Liberal Party or the New Democratic Party, you have to put pressure on your leader. The bottom line is it was the pressure that members of the NDP in particular put on Jack Layton that led to Elizabeth May's inclusion in the federal leaders debate. And so if you can pressure the other three party leaders and to have them commit to debating with the Greens, that will put us over the top. We've already had 2 leaders debates, and I've been included in both of them. Doug Ford didn't show up to one of them, and we should be included in all of them. So if you could do that, that would be amazing and would really help us out.
Hello. Is this on? Okay. Hello, it's Anne from King Vaughan Green Party. Thank you very much for coming, all of you. It's good to see you again, Jose. I have a difficult question because I have to try to be diplomatic. But I know when our biggest problem is when people believe in the green values or like the candidate, but vote strategically. And David, you admitted to that in 2015. And to say that, to be upset with Andrew Weaver for kind of doing the same, it's a cynical move. And that's what's killing us. And I think that if we can get some critical mass out there, and I think it's great that you're publicly green here in Ontario, and I hope that you will push those notable friends of yours to do the same, and that we know that in some of our ridings we might not elect our Green Party, but they do look at the total numbers of those of us who believe this is important, and it will have an effect over the time. I just wonder too if you could talk to CBC. I hardly ever see a Green on CBC.
Can I make a couple comments on that? And it broke my heart when Site C was approved. And I know Elizabeth and I talked a lot with Andrew Weaver and the BC Greens. And I know it broke David's heart too.
I told him, don't ask me for any more help.
Yeah, so, and part of the challenge is we don't really live in a democracy in Canada. And until we have proportional representation and until we have a government that reflects the democratic will of the people of Canada, politics is incredibly difficult. And David's right. It's not so much the politicians, the people, it's the system. And we have to change the system. And so if you could get involved in Fair Vote Canada, if I could just do a shout out to a third-party organization that is working so hard to change the electoral system. If you, after the provincial election, because we need you to help us elect Greens in Ontario on June 7th, but after that, if you could get involved in the PR referendum this fall in British Columbia, we absolutely need to move to PR to get away from strategic voting. And so the message I'm giving to the people in Ontario right now is, the only wasted vote is a vote that you don't believe in. If we keep voting for governments we don't believe in, or politicians we don't believe in, we will never get a government we believe in. And so I'm asking people not to vote out of fear of something you don't want. But in this election, let's vote for hope. Let's vote for the hope that our children can have a future, to have a livable planet. And I don't think it's a coincidence that after the 2007 election, when the Greens had their best vote total in the history of the party, that the Liberal government named two pieces of legislation after the Green Party, the Greenbelt Act and the Green Energy Act. And I don't think it's a coincidence the name green was in each one of those two acts. They could have called it the Land Preservation Act or the Natural Heritage Act or whatever. They could have called it the Renewable Energy Act or the Clean Energy Act. They called it the Greenbelt and the Green Energy Act. And it was because they knew that hundreds of thousands of people in Ontario voted green. And so every vote pushes, whether we elect Greens or not, every vote pushes the other three parties to adopt green policies. It's the right thing to do.
One more thing with that is that this year in Ontario, there's per vote funding. So for each vote we get a little bit of money over the next 4 years to help build the party that you want to see in the future. And because of each vote that somebody voted with their heart last election, we were able to get over $600,000 in funding this year from the government. So if those people voted strategically last time, we would not have had that funding and been able to do all that we're doing right now. So this year it's critical that you vote with your conscience and vote with your heart. So thank you.
I know we got a couple of other questions, but I'm actually going to ask something even greater from you. Because we will only win if you actually get out of your comfort zone. You have to understand this, that we're at a crossroads on the history of our province and of our country, and I dare say North America. We need Ontario to remain a place of honor, a place of good government. And we Greens will do that on behalf of the places where we get the honor to be elected, because we will be the fiduciary responsibility. We will be the conscience in Parliament. That's what we want to do. But we will not get to Queen's Park if you don't really, really, really work hard with us. We are not alone ever when we win. It's always a team effort. And there's over 200 people right here, right now, and listening in social media, probably hundreds more. If you come to Markham, Stouffville, even once, all of you, even half of you, my neighbors will go, wow, that's a green wave. And then they'll start thinking different. And then one of us will go into Parliament. And then in the next election, we'll have 2, 3, maybe 20, like it's going on in British Columbia. And we will stop the stupid Pickering nuclear power plant, because it costs billions to boil water in that manner. And we pay too much money in electricity here. In BC, in Manitoba, in Quebec, electricity is very, very cheap because they use hydropower and wind power. We need to focus on communities, and we need energy systems like the ones we have in Markham. Why doesn't Stouffville have the same district energy networks that the new downtown Markham has? Because the political representatives here have not actually paid attention to reality. And that's what we're trying to do, be it in Guelph, be it in Thornhill, be it in Markham, Stouffville. We want to be the people you dream to be. And we will not get there without your help. Fairdebates.ca will help. But this little form that I keep showing to people on the hope that they're going to listen to us, it's going to make a great deal of difference. And the last thing I ask you, when we ask you to like us in, dare I say, Facebook, yes, please like us, particularly if you live in Markham, Stouffville, so we can then begin to communicate with the other members of Markham, Stouffville. I need to talk to 20,000 people and convince them to vote for me. If I make that happen, I will win. And I think our narrative is better than the red, the blue, or the orange. And why not Greens? You know, we're well prepared, and we want to do things for the community. Folks, I've just been told by David, that we're going to have to wrap it up. So I'm going to ask this. We are used to, as academics, David is still Professor Emeritus, you know? So we're going to go and take the questions all at once, and we will answer them very quickly. There were about 3 people that wanted to ask a question. Could you lift up your arm? So please be cognizant that David has to go. So ask briefly, and we shall answer. So we'll go all the questions. You got a mic. Okay, go.
Hello. David, you talked a lot about consumption. You mentioned big corporations pushing consumption especially, but I think it's also a supply and demand problem, right? Because each time we make these purchases, we're also saying that we want to see more of this. So I guess what I'm asking is, what things can we do in our day-to-day lives outside of politics that will also kind of put a vote forward? How can we vote with our dollar outside of the election date?
The other question, please. It's you?
I have a comment and a request from Green Party. It's not much of a question, but I've heard a lot about our planet and conserving environment, and I've heard acknowledgement of our protectors of water and how important it is. But there's one thing I have not heard: protection of First Nations on this land. There was no ceremony to acknowledge them. There was no inclusion of First Nations. And until we understand this land, we will not be able to protect it. That knowledge is with First Nations. If we don't protect the First Nations and don't listen and learn from them, we will never succeed. So my request and challenge is, when you do open up with those words, do have a ceremony, do have a First Nation person to do an opening ceremony. Get a pipe carrier here. Have them being represented, not excluded, because they are nowhere to be seen. We are on their land. And that, I think, is a disconnect. Right now, that's a huge disconnect. We are all immigrants. I'm an immigrant. And when I was coming here, my first experience of Native ceremony was in Vienna, on the subway, having regalia, drumming, songs. I did not understand then what that was until I came here 20 years later, participating in authentic Native ceremony with the prayer. That was whitewashing. That was expropriation of Native culture. So I am asking you, you have my vote already, but that vote will be so much stronger if you can include the First Nations.
Miigwech, I'm Nancy, and I was just, I walked with Josephine Mandam. I walked with her. And I was wondering, again, how are you going to involve Indigenous traditional knowledge of the land? Because, as you said, the trees, they tell us everything about how to protect the land. But Indigenous people also have been here for thousands of years. How are we going to tap into that? And what I have learned on the walks is that in order for us to understand what's happening, we have to connect our heads with our hearts. And without that, we can't move forward. Miigwech.
I'll make it quick. As a concerned taxpayer, okay, let's go back to reality. We know about government waste. I'm 55 years old in this country. I work all my life, and it's taxes. And now you guys come up with again, you're telling me, okay, well, you know, we got to get a carbon tax. I'd like to see government seriously address the problem of overspending. Take some of that money and then let's invest it, you know, in trying to save our environment. I'm all for what you're saying. I agree 100%. But the way this government spends money, it's insane. All my life I've seen this going on. Millions of dollars for executives that are trying to fire to get rid of, right, for an example. You got to pay these people hundreds of thousands of dollars, yet the average Canadian person or family trying to make a living in this country is overtaxed, taxed to death. That's the problem, one of the big problems. You want my vote? Work on cutting taxes. I'll back you up on the environmental, not a problem. Let's save the trees, let's save the environment. But I want to hear a party go after saving money in government, and we're looking for the working class too. You know? Thank you.
Good job.
We're going to take the 4 questions, if you don't mind. And I'm going to start by apologizing in front of all of you, because you're absolutely right. It was my job to introduce and to ask for permission to hold this meeting in the traditional territories. So, apology, fully acknowledged. It was my fault. Mike picked up on it and he actually mentioned it. But I'm going to tell you this because an apology without actions is worth nothing. And I'm telling you this morning, I started thinking about this, and I was wondering whose territory is this that we're sitting on? And I phoned in the morning the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs and Reconciliation, 416, whatever. And they put me through, and the person, I asked the question, I'm doing an event in Markham, Stouffville, whose traditional territory I see that? And they say, don't know, just give me a second, I'll see if I can find somebody. They put me through a person, and that person say, I don't know, I'll see if I can find another person. You need to talk to so-and-so. And then I went into voicemail. Left a message there, they never called me back. Then I decided to phone the Chippewas of Georgina Island. And I say to the person that answered, I'm holding an event here in Markham, Stouffville. And I've looked in the internet, it's confusing, and I need an answer. And they say, wait a minute. And they put an elder in the phone and they say, you're okay to say that this is Chippewa territory. And we encourage you to do that. There is no excuse for my forgetfulness. But the story didn't end there, because I did a little bit of research. I'm a researcher. And I started seeing when the Chippewas of Georgina Island were settled in Fox Island and Snake Island and Georgina Island, which is the headwaters that this magnificent Rouge River then flows to Lake Ontario. And, you know, I was left with wanting to know more. So what did I do? I got into the electric car. Yes, I do have an electric car. And I went to the Markham Museum. And I arrived to the Markham Museum at 2 o'clock, and the volunteers can tell you, they're all, where is Waldo? Where is Jose? He needs to be fixing this up. And I was in the museum. They opened at 12 o'clock. I went at 10, noticed that it was open at 12, went back. And I entered the museum and I asked, is there here a First Nation exhibit? And the answer was no, there's no First Nations exhibit. And I say, is there somebody here that can answer a question about this? No, there isn't. And then the person in the entrance, I was flabbergasted. How is it possible that the Markham Museum doesn't have anything of the last 10,000, 20,000 years? All we have is a history of the last 150 or so. And they directed me to some books there, and they all started in the 1800s, like the history before didn't exist. And I wanted to tell you that because that needs to change. And if you vote for me, that's one of the things I will do. I will work with the museum. And even if I don't win, as a researcher at York University, I will make it my mission to find an answer to that question, because I'm still not clear of the history of where we live. And I've been here for over 11 years. That is the honest truth. And please accept my apology.
Yeah, so I think we need to wrap up tonight. David has politely asked, and he's got a big day tomorrow with me in Guelph. But I just want to say, if you go to gpo.ca/vision, we have a broad range of ideas, policies, commitments on a wide range of issues, including, I think, a very thoughtful section on Indigenous relations that we've developed with a number of Indigenous elders and chiefs. And also we have a number of policies where we talk about ways in which government can save money, but also some ways in which government can raise additional revenues as well. because most parties never get specific about those kinds of things, and we're actually willing to be honest with you about them so we can live sustainably both financially and environmentally. And I'll leave it at that for tonight. So thank you.
I have 2 Haida grandchildren. I have 3 Métis grandchildren. So I understand what the issue is, and thank you for raising that. I had it down in my notes, but then Mike did the recognition, and so I didn't do that. But absolutely, Indigenous people are a critical part of the challenge we face today is psychological. It's not for a lack of resources or knowledge. It's psychological. The way we see the world shapes the way we interact with it. And right now, we're driven by what I call a resourcist mentality that's happened over the last 500 years with exploration, occupation, colonization, and settling the newcomers, including my grandparents that came at the turn of the last century, see this land not as something sacred or even a home. We see it as an opportunity, as it's full of resources. And the Indigenous people, if you read Tom King's excellent book, The Inconvenient Indian, the whole thrust of Canadian society and government has been get those damned Indigenous people off the land. Get them out of there. They're impeding our ability to take. And we have to, I think, learn that sense that land is sacred, that it's air, water, soil, and our relatives, the other species that we are grateful to. You know, in the many feasts and potlatches and funerals I've attended, when you hear the songs and the prayers, they're all about thanking the Creator for nature's abundance and generosity. And this is the part that's missing in our society, there is a reciprocal responsibility, an obligation to do everything they can to keep nature's ability to provide for us into the future. And we've lost that sense of reciprocity. It's all about take, without any sense of obligation or responsibility. So, I'm at an age where I can't remember past the last 2 minutes. The first question was the only one that was directed at me, and what did you ask?
Hi, I just asked what things we could do outside of politics.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there are books out on 10 ways to save the planet, 100 ways to save the planet. I mean, there are all kinds of things, of course, we all have to do. The sum total of the way that we live and behave, of course, is what is the impact on the planet. Each of us is a drop in the bucket, but a lot of drops will fill any bucket, and we have an impact. But I really believe the challenge now is we need big decisions made on behalf of us by the people we elect to office. It really is political, and we have to get that commitment so that all of our policies then will extend down from that commitment to Paris. If we don't have that, then everything we do as individuals, yes, it has an effect, but it's a drop in the bucket to what we need now. We need some big decisions, and I believe that the responsibility then is that we have to get heavily involved in politics. As citizens and as adults who are concerned about the future we're leaving for our children, we've got no choice but to tell the people we elect to office to get the hell off the corporate agenda and start thinking about the decisions that are going to reflect our children's future. I'm sorry. I really do have to go. I've had a very long day. I had a 7 o'clock breakfast, which is 4 o'clock our time. But thank you very much for coming out. Jose's the man.
Thank you, David. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I just want to say thank you all for coming out tonight. I know Jose and Karen, I'm assuming you'll be here to answer questions if people want to come up and ask personally. And have a wonderful night and a safe trip home. Thank you.
Happy Earth Day. Thank you, everybody.